Hey, welcome back guys. So this tutorial we're going to start focusing on procedural texturing, and in this particular video I wanted to cover some elements of Maya together with Photoshop. I've been covering a lot of these procedural textures in class, and I found that there's a big discrepancy between the understanding of how these nodes work and how to essentially be able to apply them inside of your scenes. So what I thought of is maybe kind of set up a scene, very simplified scene with a few textures and then different procedural nodes inside of Maya, and then I'll go through each of them one by one, and I will also try to kind of link them up with how these type of nodes would be applied inside of Photoshop. So if your understanding of Photoshop is more in-depth than the Maya procedural nodes, then this will start making more sense in terms of the connections and how they actually work and so on and so forth. So in this scene I've got a simplified Maya sphere, and nothing has been applied to it yet at this point. And just a quick heads up, I am using Maya 2016. Thus the new Hypershade looks a little bit different than the previous one. They've essentially combined the bottom window to now become a node editor, and then the rest of it is still the classic Maya layout where you have your bins where you actually drop in your different materials into your scene. I usually consider this as my material lister, and then we have the different texture tabs and then utility tabs that I have placed down. So let's get started. I'm going to create just a simple blend material as a preview material. I'm going to go right click on the object, I'm going to assign new material, and then just off screen I'm bringing this into view. I'm going to drag in a simple blend. There we go. And we can see that we have brought that into the scene. So at the moment the material, I'm going to give that a name as test material. There we go. And from the right hand side you see that we have the attribute editor, and this is where we're going to drag in our textures and start making our connections. So essentially the workspace is where we see all the working area and the nodes, how we connect them up together, and then the final output of those nodes will eventually be connected to our blend material that we have in the scene. So at the moment the blend edit or material is definitely not down in the list at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to middle mouse drag and drop this in here, and then you can see it's way off in the distance. That's typical of the node editor. For some reason they just pop off screen. You have to zoom out with your alt right mouse button, and then alt middle mouse button allows us to pan around in this view. Right. So I'm always going to keep my material on the right hand side, and on the left hand side we have the different types of nodes that we will be covering throughout this project. And also, like I said, I will try and relate them to Photoshop and how you would accomplish the same kind of look inside of Photoshop. Right, so on the left hand side we have our two different textures. One is some sort of a paint-like surface with a bit of rust scratches in between, and at the bottom we have a fully rusted kind of oxidized kind of metal effect on this image. So we can see how we can combine these guys together. So let's bypass all of these nodes at the moment. I'm going to take just this texture just to show you guys how I would go about connecting these up in the Hypershade. So over here we have the out color, and the out color is essentially our primary output node from Maya, from any of the file nodes, or essentially any 2D or 3D texture. And then these nodes have usually some sort of an input connection, and they also have an output connection. So if we just look at this image right now at the moment, we can see it's a file node. So this file node is sourcing a file from the hard drive. So I can go in here, click on that little icon, and go and look for a particular image on my hard drive. You can find this node from the 2D textures menu if you ever wanted to create your own. If you click on this guy, this network will set up itself. You don't have to go and create the 2D placement node yourself. You can just click on that file node and it will do the rest for you. And then from here you can go and indicate the exact path of the texture. Once you're happy with that, Maya will now be able to take this information and pass it along to your models. So here's my texture. Here's my texture, here's my material. I'm going to take my out color, I'm going to drag and drop this guy into the color connections of my material. As soon as I do that, you will notice in my attribute editor that particular connection has now been connected up into the color channel of my material. And what do you have it? You have a texture applied to your model. Great stuff. So at the moment it's just a simplified texture. There's nothing really special about this, and we're going to go through the process of essentially breaking this up into separate specular channels at some point, and also a bump channel. So at the moment I just have a pure RGB output from here going straight into my material. My material has the shading group, and the shading group applies that to our model, and thus we have the texture being displayed in the viewport. It is worth noticing that I do have my texture preview turned on inside of my viewport, and if you do not do that, you're not going to be able to see that. So a hotkey for that is pressing 6 on the keyboard, and that will allow us to preview our texture. Another thing that's worth noticing is that on our network we have this new mode that Maya 2016 has implemented, this little S button that simply stands for solo. If we click on that, what Maya will do is solo out that particular node throughout the whole network, and then only preview that without any shading information. So anything that comes down from the left hand side through the inputs of the file node, that will automatically be soloed out so that you can see the result or the combined effect of all the other nodes connected to that particular node. If I were to go and unsolo this, you will now see Maya will propagate its effect of the shading all the way to the actual material so that we can preview that over here. Right, so the next thing that I want to talk about is that each shader has a single connection for each of these attributes. If you have a look on your right hand side, you have a single connection for the color, you have a single connection for the, let's say, the bump channel, and a single connection for your specular channel. Each of these have one single attachment node. Now if you wanted to have the ability to connect more than two different textures to the same color inputs of our shader, then Maya will have a bit of a problem by default. Let's bring these guys a little bit off to the side to make some space. I'll select these guys and just move them, left click and move them off to the side. Let's reposition this, and then let's try and see if we can connect this out color to the same inputs on our shader. As soon as you do that, Maya will automatically disconnect any previous node attached to that same connection. It essentially does a force override, where it's forcing the connection from the new connections of the new texture, and then it overrides the old one, essentially breaking the connection. If you wanted to do that manually, you can also select that little arrow line in between and then press delete, and that will break the connections between these nodes. The other thing that's worth noticing is that the actual line is an indication with a little arrow in which direction the information is streaming. This is very important later on as we start connecting things, that we keep track of what is connecting to where and how the information is streaming through those different nodes to get to the final result on our shader. With this information, I'm now going to show you guys how we essentially can combine multiple textures together as a single texture input on our material. So on the list of nodes that I have here, I'm just going to check if I have created the layered texture yet. Nope, not yet. So I'm going to show you guys we can drag that down from the other textures inside our creation nodes window, and you'll see there's a layer texture right there. I'm going to click on this guy, bring this into view, and let's put that right in between these two nodes. And let's quickly have a look at what this node does. This node essentially provides us multiple connections, essentially almost like our typical Photoshop layer stack. This window here at the top is essentially our layers, and every time that I click, I'm essentially creating a new layer, a new empty layer that I can now go and fill in with some sort of information, whether it's an image that you draw or a procedural texture like the 2D textures or 3D textures. It's all up to you how you would like to rearrange them. So what I'm going to do is just get rid of one of those nodes, as I only need 2 of these textures. I'm going to go ahead now and drag my file texture, this one that looks like paint. I'm going to take this one and connect it into my layer texture. So to do that, there's a few ways we can do that. You can either select the actual layer texture and then middle mouse drag and drop this node onto the color slot, and what Maya will do is go and connect the selected node or selected layer from the layer window and automatically connect that in as one of the inputs. If I now go ahead and I grab corrosion and I drag this one into view and I connect it over here, Maya will now go and place a third one into the list. That's not what I want. I want to take the existing one and then connect it to that. So I could always just delete this one if I don't want it, or I can just delete the original and then select this one and then middle mouse drag that to the color. So as soon as you do that, we can now see that Maya has made the connections. The information is streaming into the input side of our layer texture, and we now have an output color from the layer texture that is now the combined result of both of these textures together. So I'm going to take the outs color and then reconnect that to our shader, and the result is essentially the combination of 2 textures, except for it's not previewing in the viewport as I would naturally think. So how this works is, if we quickly jump to Photoshop, we'll notice that if I were to create a new document, let's create a new document with a resolution of, let's say, 1024, it should be fine. And I go ahead to my previous texture, I do a Control A to select all, Control C to copy, and then paste that into a new layer. And then do the same thing with the corrosion layer. So I select all, copy, and let's paste that into a new layer over here. We can now see that Photoshop has now placed the blue layer, or the layer with the paint, on top of the corrosion layer. So that's essentially the same thing as what we are seeing currently in Maya. The top layer at the moment is completely overriding what is below that, unless I put down some sort of opacity. So if I introduce a bit of opacity, Maya will now try and blend these 2 textures together. So the less opacity I have, the more it's going to show the layer below, until I reach a complete 0 opacity of the layer above, and I will not be able to see anything that's on that particular layer. So that's essentially how the opacity system works inside of Photoshop. So what I'm going to do now is actually show you guys how the same thing applies inside of Maya. If I were to look at my layer texture, you'll see here we've got file 2 and file 1, and then the one at the top is currently a complete over in blending mode. So that's essentially taking the result of that and putting it above any image below that. So it's completely overriding it, just like in Photoshop. The layer at the right hand side is essentially the bottom layer, and then every time we add a new layer, it's going to go in front, meaning it's the same thing as putting a layer above in Photoshop, and then that's how this system works. If I now introduce a bit of alpha, now this is essentially opacity slider inside of Photoshop. So if I bring this down, you'll now see it's dragging the first layer that we have, meaning the background layer, bringing that opacity down. This is not what I want to do. I want to drag the opacity of my layer above to a lower opacity. So I'm going to select this one first. Then I'm going to bring this down. As soon as I do that, what Maya will do is now show me the results of those two layers combined as they are blending together. So the lower I go, the more I can see the result of the layer below. The higher I go, the more I can see the layer of the original paint above. So by looking at that slider, this is how we can combine the results of those two. So let's quickly look at another thing that's worth mentioning. Inside of Photoshop, we have types of blending modes that we can set one layer to blend with the layer below. This is a crucial step in manipulating textures and essentially being able to combine the results of them with a little bit more maths involved. So I'm going to go to my normal blending mode. I'm going to switch that to something like multiply. And what Maya will do is try and multiply the colors of my first layer with the layer below. Mathematically, it's going to try and blend those two based on their actual pixel values, and then the result would be something like this. If I were to switch that to a different mode like linear dodge add, you can see that the combined results of the pixels in brightness are being multiplied together, and then the result is much brighter together. So there's obviously a few different modes that we can play with. We can switch this to overlay. We can jump to a simplified light and color. We have a color dodge. We have a screen. We have a lighten. And we have a darker color. This one almost acts like some sort of erosion effect, which is kind of cool. But what we want to do is we just want to see how we can apply or affect the same kind of system inside of our layer texture inside of Maya. Let's quickly jump back again. Back in Maya, we have our layer texture, we have the blend mode, and I can switch this to a few different blending modes. Let's start off with multiply and see if we get the same result if we do that. Well, you have it. The texture itself is much darker. You can see the result is showing up in the viewport as being much more contrasted as well. If we switch this to add, we can definitely see that those colors are doing the same thing like we saw in Photoshop. You can also introduce a bit of alpha on top of that if you still want that previous layer to not be as hectic applied on top of our first. So there's definitely some playing involved in terms of how we want the textures to display. Now, the thing is with the alpha, as you can see, it also gives us a little box that we can connect a texture into, so that we can define the way that this is blending, and not just between a value of 0 and a value of 1, but rather as a texture that defines which parts of the image will have darker or which parts will have lighter values in the alpha. So I'm going to quickly jump back to Photoshop and show you guys how we can do the same technique using an alpha mask, or just a simple layer mask, in fact. So what I'm going to do is take my layer 2 that's at the top, and down here at the bottom there's a button that essentially allows us to add a layer mask. I'm going to click on that. It brings up the little layer mask icon, and then on this layer mask what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint with black and white where I want to have parts of the texture that is at the bottom to show through the current image at the top. So by painting with black, I can essentially see that by placing down the spots in my mask, I'm eating away at the pixels that allows us to see the image that's at the bottom. If I go and change some of the gradients to be a little bit more softer, I can then gradually fade these values. So you can see over here in our layer mask that the image is going from white, that means it's fully opaque at the top, going through different gradients of shades from a medium gray all the way into a very dark-ish black tone, and the result of that will essentially fade into the image below, meaning it's fully transparent. Let's see if we can apply the same technique inside of Maya using some sort of texture. Inside of Maya we have an alpha, and we also have our little checker box over here. I'm going to click on that, and it's going to bring up the create render node for us on the left hand side. I brought that into view. I'm going to now pick a simple texture just to represent the same kind of look. I'm going to use a simple ramp. I'm going to connect that in as our alpha, and then we can see that the alpha starts at the bottom as a dark color and gradually fades to white. I'm going to clamp these values a little bit more intensely towards each other, and as I do that, you can definitely notice that the effect of that particular ramp is gradually fading into a result where at the top we have the paint and at the bottom we have the layer below, or the rusted image. So by essentially going back to our previous layer editor, we can now see that the alpha is not simply just a black and white value, but it's a ramp that can be textured, or any texture for that matter. You can use fractals, you can use noise, you can use cloud, pretty much any Maya node that is RGB based. Plug it in there and we can now see a result of a blending of those two textures. Right, so that's how we can do two texture blending together using a layer texture and some blending modes together with an alpha that allows us to give the resulted texture in the color channel of our material with a lot more definition than we had as two separate textures. So the next node that I want to talk about is going to be the blend colors. This one does pretty much the same thing as the layer texture, except for it doesn't give us the opportunity to change the alpha or the blending modes. It does have a blender though that we can eat away as an alpha. Let me rather show you guys so that you can actually see the resulting effect of that. I'm going to keep this one here so that you guys can see the result. Inside our nodes that we created, I'm going to scroll down until I find my, let's see if I place that one in here yet. It's not here yet. Okay, let's create that one. I'm going to go to utilities. I'm going to type in blend colors. There we go. That's the node that I'm looking for. I'm going to clear my mask here at the top, and we're going to bring this into view. There's my blend colors. I'll place it in between, and I'm going to see how this node works. By itself, I'm going to take the out color and reconnect that with the color on our input side of the material, and you'll see that this one starts off with this pinkish magenta color. So what this color means, it's actually blending two different colors together based off of a blender, or rather a value from the blender. So inside of our attribute editor, you'll notice that we have an option in here to change color 1 and color 2, and then we have a fixed value going from 0 all the way to white, or 1, being 0 being black obviously and 1 being white, that blends between color 1 and color 2. So this node provides us quite a bit of flexibility, but not nearly as much as the layer texture. It works slightly in a different way, but it's not as complex in terms of understanding how the node works. So let's see if we replace the colors of color 1 and color 2 using the file from the paint and the corrosion image. Let's take this one and connect that to color 1, and the same thing with out color from corrosion 2 into color 2. Right. So already, just by default, you can see that a value of 0.5 will give us a blended result of texture 1 and texture 2. If I were to go all the way to 0, it's giving me the result of only color 2. If I bring it all the way to 1, it's only going to give me the result of color 1, being this image. So if we take a look at how we can apply that same gradient ramp using the blender, I'm going to use the existing one that we have already. I'm not going to recreate another one. So I'm going to zoom out a bit, and there you have it. There is our ramp. So I'm going to take the color from our ramp, middle mouse, drag and drop this into Blender. As soon as you do that, you can immediately see that the result of that ramp is now propagating the same kind of effect as we saw previously with the layer texture. In my opinion, this one is much simpler to work with as a starting point, especially as a beginner, than working with a layer texture, except for if you really need the ability to change the blending mode of how one texture blends on top of another. Also, you can have multiple textures, whereas this one does not give you the flexibility of more than 2 textures. So the way to override that is to essentially create multiple blends combining together. So in essence, if I had 2 textures going into blend colors 1, and I had a duplicate of blend colors, and then take maybe a third and a fourth texture, combine those 2 with that particular blend, then we'll have 4 textures that we need to combine together. It's much easier to do that with a with a layer texture than it is to do that with a blend colors, as we'll have to have multiple blend nodes to essentially be able to pass that information through all of them to eventually end up with a single blend colors that will go into our out color over here. To give you guys an example of that, I'm going to give some space. I'm going to take my let's add some extra nodes over here. I'm going to create a 2D texture. Let's take a simplified checker texture. It's probably somewhere off in the distance. There it is. Bring that up. This would be my texture 3. And let's have a look at maybe using a fractal as a third texture. I'm going to bring that into view as well. Right. So secondary blend textures is going to be necessary. So I'm going to click on Utilities, type in Blend, and then there it is. Great stuff. I'm going to combine these 2 textures together now. I'm going to take the out color to color 1 and out color to color 2. Looking at the result of these 2, if I were to solo that out, you can see that the result over here is a gradient of, or a combination of these 2 textures. Now I can still go and set it some sort of a ramp or blender in between these 2. For now, I'm just going to utilize maybe let's keep it simple. I'm going to create a 2D texture, simplified Photoshop file. Let's bring that into view. Grab that and bring it over here. Stack that on top as a blender. And let's quickly look for the file. I'm going to quickly go back maybe a few steps. Go to my external hard drive, look for my folder, full-time presentation, fundamentals, UVs, and grab this image over here. Right. So this will be my Blender texture. This one is a simple image. It has some white and has a medium gray, 50% gray dot in the center and some black lines at the top. Let's see how we can blend these 2 textures together utilizing the blend colors. I'm going to drag this into view and then connect that into Blender's. Hey, what's happening? Why is that not going into the Blender by default? So the result for that is our current image has 3 different values for out color. It has color R, G, and B. Now if I were to take that node and I drag this out, you'll see that the line is yellow, meaning there's 3 different bits of information trying to go out from the current file, and if I try to connect that into the blend colors, it disables. Now how is that possible? Why is that happening? Let's quickly have a look. The blend colors by default is a single float value. It's a single value that does not have separate 3 channels driving that. If we wanted to convert this into some sort of a format that the Blender can read, we have to take either a single channel coming from this grayscale image, and whether we take just the red channel or just the green channel or even just the blue channel, the values from this gray, white and black image will still be the same regardless of whether you choose red, green or blue. So that's a quick way of getting past this issue. We can take that, and if I go now into the Blender, we can see that connected without any problem and works successful. Right. If I were to solo this out, you can now see that parts of the image that was gray had a 50% blend between the textures that's below and the textures that's above. Parts that's completely black, while I have a complete cutout of just the texture below being the checker texture as color 2, and parts that's completely white that is going to show up only fractal being color 1 at this point. So that's how this texture is blending. So now that we have this connection as a secondary blend colors texture, how do we take this blend and blend that together with this blend? Well, if you want to do that, we need to then have either a third blend that will connect these two together, but we have to have an additional blender that will kind of combine these two together. So instead of doing that, I'm going to start introducing to you guys a third node, or third type of utility node that we haven't talked about. So far we talked about the layer texture, we talked about the blend colors, and now the third one is going to be a multiply divide node. So the multiply divide node, you'll find that under your utilities, and then we can go and have a look over here. Let's see, looking for multiply divide, there it is. I'm going to click on that, and let's have a look. There it is, way off in the distance. What this node does is looking at the values of input 1 over here, and you'll see it has 3 different channels. So you can consider this as vectors, or you could consider these as color values, being red for the first, green for the second, and blue for the third. That applies the same thing to input 2. So we know that we have 2 blend colors, one for the top network and one for the bottom network. And if we wanted to combine all 4 of these textures together, we essentially just take the output of this one, connect it to the input. You'll see it has 3 different values going from the out, R, G, B, and they're going straight into the inputs on the side, and it's automatically sending the red channel to the red, the green channel to the green, and the blue channel to the blue without any problems. The same thing will apply now to go to this output, into input 2, and we have a single output going from this multiply divide that we can now attach to our shader. So let's quickly have a look how we can do that. I'm going to select that, just drag that out, and then connect that into our color. So the resulting effects of these 4 textures are now combined into the shader as a result that we see. Just trying to solo this out. we can see that this texture is now applied, where the checker part is showing the combination of those areas via the first texture as well as the second set of textures from this part of the network versus this part of the network. So the result that we see here is essentially a combined result of 4 textures going into single multiply divide that then gets multiplied together, and the result of those 4 textures will be connected to our test material. If we wanted to do the same thing using our layer texture, then all we have to do is simply just create our 4 different textures. I'm going to click here in the front, middle mouse, drag and drop this to the front. Click here, drag and drop this to the front, so we have 2 new nodes that we can go and connect that. So let's take all of this, move that out of the way so that we don't get confused, and we're going to see how we can combine these 3, being the mask at the top, the fractal in the middle, and the checker at the bottom, connect that, or at least these 2, into our layer texture. So I'm going to select my first, or rather my third node, and I'm going to drag my checker texture into view, and I'm going to connect that to my colors. I'm also going to do the same thing to the fractal, where I drag the fractal, undo that, select this first, and then drag the checker. Which one was it? Checker and fractal, that's the one, that's what I'm looking for. Great. So now we have 4 textures combined, and if we can connect the out color from the layer texture into there, we're seeing the result of just the fractal. So why is it happening only to the fractal? Essentially, we need to be able to connect some sort of an alpha that defines where the fractal will apply itself. So I'm going to take our mask, bring this file node at the top, and I'm going to connect that into our alpha channel for the fractal. Let's have a look how we can do that. I'm going to take my middle mouse, drag and drop this right into the alpha channel, and we can see now we're connected that to our fractal. And let's have a look. If I click on this over here, you can see the fractal, we can see the blending mode is currently none. I'm going to put that to override. You can now see that the fractal has now clipped away the parts where the alpha is, and the rest of the parts where we have our fractal texture being the white will be completely overriding everything else, and the parts that's completely black is cutting out, so it only shows the checkered texture that's directly underneath. Now the problem is that we have here is that these 2 textures are working together, but then the checker texture does not know how to blend with the texture below that. So we need to see how we can essentially connect that up properly. I'm going to take my checker texture, being this one. I'm going to take my ramp from previously. I'm going to see if I can get the same effect if I were to put it to over, and then take my ramp and drag and drop that into alpha. By doing that, you can see now the parts of my checker texture is being masked out by the ramp, and that is now essentially combining the results of that together with the texture below. So as we do that, we need to constantly be analyzing how these 4 textures are working together to get the end result that we saw that we have with this network. With this one, it was a pretty simple setup, as we just connected the nodes right into the network without any problems. The only difference is we had to have multiple blend modes with a single multiply divide that combine the results of 4 sets of textures, and rather 2 sets of textures and another 2 sets of masks and then that will become our final result for the diffuse, or rather the color slot on our material. With the layer editor, we have a lot of things that's working together or working against us, in terms of we have to find the right blending mode. We have to make sure that we multiply these guys together so that the result of these giving us the same result as what we had with our multiply divide. So at the moment it's not working exactly as I am hoping. We have to find the right blending mode to get to that point. Now I'm not going to spend too much time trying to get the same look at the moment. What I wanted to get across is essentially just the difference between our layer texture and how that gives us control over tweaking these nodes versus the multiply divide node. Sorry, the blending colors. So what I wanted to do now is I wanted to break all these connections, and essentially I don't really need these ones at the top anymore, especially when we go and start looking at the other nodes. I'm going to get rid of that, get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this, and get rid of that. Wonderful. So now we still have our two original textures and the ramp over here. I might want to utilize the ramp at some point, but for now I'm just going to move it off at the top so that it's not in my way as I continue with this. I'm going to look at the next node in my list. I'm going to look at the set range node. I find this one being very, very useful. This particular node, in my opinion, is like levels inside of Photoshop. So how this works is, if I quickly look at the attributes inside of our attribute editor, we have a few different node values. We have a value, we have min, max, old min, and old max. This is essentially what we're stuck with. Now, in terms of how this works as a levels, it's a bit confusing for most people to understand how this node works. Think of your value as the input for any color information if you wanted to change the result of that. Now, in this case, we haven't connected anything in there, so this node would not know how to deal with the resulting textures. So I'm going to go ahead and take my first texture from our file node. I'm going to drag this into our value, and then the result of the out goes into our color. Now, just looking at that at the moment, the result of this texture is currently not being affected at all, so it's just passing through an additional node straight into my color without any effect at this point. So what I want to do is I want to see if I can clamp these values and make them more intense, or more darker, more sharper, more brighter. And then we'll see how we can get to understand how the min, max, old min, and old max works together to essentially give us that flexibility. Before we address that inside of Photoshop, in Maya, we're going to first jump to Photoshop and actually see how that works inside of there. Bringing Photoshop into view. I'm going to get rid of my mask from previously. Yes, I would like to remove it, thank you. And let's have a look. If I wanted to apply a quick levels adjustment to my particular image, what this levels adjustment is doing is looking at the values that's currently in my scene or in my layers, and then attaching itself, giving us the histogram effect of all the values that we have in this particular image. So we have, for the most part, medium gray values and not completely black values. As you can see, it's trimming down towards the edges, and we essentially have no white values on the far left side. So if we look at these little sliders down here, we can see that this is the light slider, that's a dark slider, and this is the mid slider. If I were to grab these sliders and pull them in towards that specific spike in our ramp, we can definitely see we're brightening up our image. If I do the same thing on the opposite side, you can see that we are darkening up the values inside of our image. We have also the mid-gray point, so we can either shift this closer to the lighter points or we can shift this closer to the darker points. So by default, this is how the levels work inside of Photoshop. So it reads the input values coming from the image, and then it gives you little sliders that you can tweak along to make the image brighter or darker. So jumping back to Maya, if we have a look quickly on this set range node, you can see that currently we've just fed in the information from our image that's passing straight through this node right into our shader, and then we have some inputs for the min and inputs for the max. Now, to understand how this works, we have to essentially look at the first part as saying we're defining the values between the range of A to B. So usually the minimum value is going to be black, and then the maximum value is going to be white, or in terms of just values, it's going to be 0 and 1. So each column represents a specific color channel, being red, green and blue. If you want the values to be completely pure, completely based on value, instead of colorizing it, all we have to do is make sure that we keep the R, G and B values exactly the same. If we started introducing more of the red, then we're tinting the texture towards red. If we add more of the green, same thing applies, and same thing with the blue. So always work with a consistent value, unless you ever wanted to like tint your texture with a bit of color from the red or the green or the blue. But for our sake, we're going to keep it simple. I'm going to define this as 1 to 1 to 1. And then the old, min and max, think of these as the actual sliders. This is not going to be the black point. This is the white point and the gray point. Do not think of it in terms of that. It has nothing to do with the being the black point, the midpoint and the gray point. These are red, green and blue. So if I were to change them independently, then I'm going to start again adding colorization to the texture, making it more red, more green or more blue. So the old min, I'm going to keep that also to 0 at this point, and I'm going to define the max value to 1, 1 and 1. So at the first part, I'm defining the range being 0 to 1, being the full range of the colors in the texture. The second part is the values that we're going to manipulate to clamp how the texture is outputting itself to the final result. Think of these as if I were to take the old min, being the red, green and blue, and I make these values higher. We're essentially taking the black points and we are making them darker, and if I were to add less values than 1, I'm essentially making the image brighter. So quickly jumping back to Photoshop, we have options to change the red, the green and the blue channel independently from each other, or we can choose to affect them all three at the same time. So if I were to set this to red and I start changing only the red colors for the dark sides, or only, let's say, the red colors for the light sides, I'm essentially tinting that texture with a bit of red through these little sliders. If I were to do the same thing with the green and blue, the same thing will essentially affect. But what I want to do is just make the image overall brighter or darker. So by putting it to RGB, I'm affecting all channels, red, green and blue, together on the dark side, as well as red, green and blue on the light side. So if these values that I'm typing in here are different for each other channel, then we're essentially telling Maya to tint the red, the green or the blue independently of each other and not as a set. So by making these values exactly the same, we're just maintaining the output results of all three of these channels so that nothing is tinted at all. So let's quickly have a look. If I were to type in a value like let's say 0.5 for the old max in the red channel, the green channel and the blue channel, we're essentially making the image brighter. If I type in 0.1, 0.1, 0.1, we're making the image much brighter than it was previously. If I put this back to 1, 1, and 1, I'm back to the original image output. Let's tweak the black point. Let's put this to 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. We can immediately see that we're darkening our texture. Put this to 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. As we can see, we have a little bit more of the green, so make sure you type in the values exactly. This is much darker. So on the darker side spectrum, the image turns darker much quicker than turning brighter much quicker, because most of the values are within the darker gray tones initially. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. So this is essentially what the set range slider does. It's essentially allowing us to tweak the overall contrast, or rather the overall value intensity on the lights and the dark side. We do not have the function for the midtones though, but it doesn't really matter for us, because for the most part we're usually utilizing this set range utility node as a compressor of our current values, so that the image becomes brighter or darker for any given particular reason, like maybe it's should be some sort of a mask, or so on and so forth. Right. In the next video, what I'm going to do is start talking about some of the other utility nodes, and so yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a nice evening. Cheers.